Yeah, he had a great run, and it's fun to watch. I think I watched Indiana State and Iowa. Caitlin Clark play about the same last year, so I watched a lot of basketball.
The basketball world was turned upside down in a way nobody saw coming. Not the fans in the stands, not the analysts on television, not even the insiders who claim to know everything before it happens. Because in one shocking announcement, the Indiana Fever pulled off the boldest coaching change in WNBA history, replacing the steady leadership of Stephanie White with none other than Larry Bird himself, the Hall of Famer, the Celtics icon, the Indiana legend whose very name echoes through the game like thunder. And as Caitlin Clark stepped up to the microphone to confirm the news, the entire arena fell silent, cameras flashing, hearts racing, fans barely able to process what they were hearing, because this was not just another team update. This was a once-in-a-generation bombshell that instantly rewrote the future of the franchise, the league, and possibly the entire direction of women's basketball. From the moment Caitlin Clark put on a Fever jersey, it was clear she wasn't just another rookie. She was the spark that lit an entire franchise on fire, instantly transforming the team from a struggling name on the schedule into the most talked about powerhouse in women's basketball. And her effect was impossible to ignore because almost overnight, Gainbridge Fieldhouse went from half-empty seats to a packed, roaring arena with ticket sales skyrocketing over 400%, season passes selling out, and fans traveling from across the country just to witness her brilliance in person. And suddenly, the Fever were no longer a forgotten team fighting for relevance. They were the hottest show in the league, the place where every dribble, pass, and shot from Clark turned into a highlight shared across social media and replayed on national television. And with that surge of attention came a wave of sponsors, from local businesses to global brands, all rushing to attach themselves to her rising star, making the Fever not only a basketball story, but a cultural phenomenon that reshaped how the world looked at the WNBA. What made Caitlin Clark's rise even more remarkable was that her influence didn't stop at highlight reels or sold-out crowds, because behind the scenes, she quickly became a force inside the organization itself, a rare rookie whose voice carried enough weight to shape decisions usually reserved for executives and long-tenured management. And it wasn't just her scoring or her leadership that gave her this power. It was the undeniable reality that she had turned the Fever into a business empire, a marketing machine, and a cultural headline all at once. And that kind of impact demanded recognition. So suddenly, her input on coaching strategies, roster adjustments, and even the team's long-term vision couldn't be ignored, because the Fever were no longer simply a basketball team chasing wins. They were an extension of Clark's vision, and every choice made in the front office seemed to orbit around her star power, proving that she wasn't just rewriting records on the court, she was rewriting the very structure of how a franchise is run, positioning herself as both the face of the Fever and the heartbeat that controlled its future. But with power comes tension, and that's where the cracks began to show, because while Stephanie White had earned respect as a seasoned coach, her style simply didn't sync with the fearless, instinct-driven game that made Caitlin Clark unstoppable. And Clark herself wasn't shy about hinting at the friction, recalling games where she dropped over 30 points with near triple-double numbers, yet still felt restrained by a system built to minimize mistakes instead of maximize momentum. And in those moments when White benched her after a risky turnover or slowed the pace in crunch time instead of letting Clark push the tempo, fans could see the frustration flash across her face, because this was more than just a clash of personalities. It was a clash of philosophies. One side favoring caution and control, the other thriving on creativity, aggression, and instinct. And when a generational talent like Clark is forced into a mold that doesn't fit, the results can be suffocating, sparking questions inside the locker room, inside the media, and even among fans about whether the Fever were holding back the very player who had carried them into the spotlight. For Caitlin Clark, the breaking point came in those critical moments when instinct demanded freedom, but the sideline demanded caution. And she made it clear that basketball isn't just about protecting possessions, it's about seizing opportunities, taking calculated risks, and electrifying the crowd in ways that can swing the momentum of an entire game. Yet too often, White's play calling slowed the action, pulling her back from those daring passes to wide-open teammates or those quick trigger shots that could put opponents away. And Clark voiced her frustration that instead of unleashing her natural style, she was being nudged into playing like someone she wasn't, molded into a more conservative, safer version of herself, which didn't just dull her edge, but dulled the Fever's fire as well. And the result was a growing sense that the coach was trying to contain a storm instead of letting it rage. A storm that fans paid to see, a storm that sponsors invested in, and a storm that the WNBA desperately needed to keep igniting interest across the league. That's why the whispers grew louder, because deep down, everyone could see the mismatch between Clark's fearless creativity and White's structured approach. And as Clark herself admitted in interviews and podcasts, the constant push to rein her in felt like being forced into someone else's jersey. Someone like Paige Bueckers with a slower, more traditional rhythm. But Caitlin Clark was never built to play safe. She was built to bend the game to her will, to improvise, to take over when the moment called for greatness. And trying to strip that away didn't just frustrate her, it created an atmosphere where the Fever risked wasting the rarest gift the league had seen in years. Because when you have a generational talent, you don't try to change her, you let her change the game. And fans, analysts, and even teammates started to wonder aloud if White's insistence on caution was holding back not only Clark's true potential, but the Fever's chance to rise into a dynasty. And then came the twist nobody saw coming, because when the Indiana Fever decided it was time for a change, they didn't just look for another coach. They reached for a living legend, and the name that echoed through the halls was Larry Bird, a man whose very presence carries the weight of basketball history. 3-time NBA champion, 3-time MVP, a strategist, a leader, and above all, an Indiana icon. And for fans who grew up watching his battles with Magic Johnson or saw him elevate the Pacers from the sidelines, the idea of Bird stepping into the WNBA was almost unthinkable, yet here it was, unfolding in real time, a moment that felt less like a coaching hire and more like a seismic shift, because this wasn't just a Hall of Famer lending his name, this was a brilliant mind, returning to the hardwood with the chance to reshape not only a franchise, but the very perception of women's professional basketball. And suddenly, what started as rumors of tension between Clark and White exploded into a storyline that had the entire sports world watching every move the Fever made. The impact of Bird's arrival was immediate, because this wasn't just about handing Caitlin Clark a coach she could thrive under. It was about fusing two forces of basketball greatness into one unstoppable engine. Bird bringing decades of championship wisdom, leadership, and a mind for strategy few have ever matched, while Clark carried the fire, the flair, and the cultural spotlight that no rookie had ever commanded before. And together, their partnership promised to turn every practice into a masterclass, every play into a work of art, and every game into must-see television. And beyond the hardwood, the ripple effects were enormous, with sponsors lining up, broadcasters circling, and social media ready to explode at the thought of an NBA legend guiding the WNBA's brightest star. And it quickly became clear this was bigger than basketball. It was a movement, a collision of eras, a bold experiment that could elevate the Fever from a franchise fighting for relevance into a team rewriting the very definition of success in women's professional sports. What makes this moment so historic is that it doesn't just change the Fever, it changes the entire WNBA, because Larry Bird stepping onto the sidelines alongside Caitlin Clark sends a message that greatness in basketball knows no boundaries, that the same brilliance which shaped NBA dynasties can now fuel the women's game to heights it's never reached before. And paired with Clark's unmatched star power, her ability to draw crowds, break records, and inspire an entire generation, this alliance isn't simply a coaching change, it's a cultural turning point. A bold declaration that the WNBA is no longer content to fight for attention, it is ready to command it. And the Fever now stand at the center of a movement that blends history with the future, strategy with instinct, and legacy with ambition. And as fans pack arenas and analysts scramble to understand the full weight of what's happening, one truth becomes undeniable. The combination of Clark and Bird has the power to redefine not just the Indiana Fever, not just the WNBA, but the entire landscape of women's professional sports. So, as the dust settles and the headlines continue to pour in, one thing is crystal clear. The Indiana Fever are no longer just another team in the WNBA. They are the epicenter of a revolution, because with Caitlin Clark rewriting the rules of what a rookie can mean to a franchise, and Larry Bird bringing his legendary mind to guide her journey, the Fever have become more than a basketball team. They are a story, a spectacle, a movement that is reshaping the game before our very eyes. And whether you're a lifelong fan or someone just now tuning in because of the noise, you can feel that this is the beginning of something bigger than championships. It's the birth of a new era where women's basketball demands the world's attention, and the question isn't whether the Fever will succeed. The question is how far this partnership can carry them, how much it can elevate the league, and how many barriers it can break along the way, because the WNBA has never seen a moment like this before, and with Clark and Bird at the center of it all, the future feels limitless.